The sky above Kelros was a strange mix of fire and smoke. Thick clouds rolled across the horizon, and burning wreckage fell like deadly rain. Once, this planet had been a peaceful place with green hills and silver rivers. Now it was a war zone. The two alien factions, the Varric and the Ocean, fought over every block, every building, every scrap of land. Humanity had stayed out of their war for years, but that changed when the battle spread to neutral worlds. Ethan Cross, a human soldier, stood in the middle of this chaos. His mission was clear: help evacuate civilians from the lower districts before the bombardments destroyed everything. His squad was moving fast through broken streets, guiding groups of frightened aliens toward the transport ships waiting beyond the hills. Ethan kept scanning the ruins around him. He knew how quickly things could go wrong. The sound of energy blasts echoed between the tall, shattered buildings. Every explosion shook the ground under his boots. He could feel the heat from burning wrecks even through his armor. The air tasted of metal and ash. "Squad, we're moving to the next block," his commander's voice came over the comms. "No stopping unless there's direct threat. The longer we stay, the more we risk." Ethan nodded, though no one could see him. He was about to follow when he heard something. A small, sharp cry. It wasn't loud, almost drowned out by the chaos around him. But it was there. He stopped, turning his head toward the sound. "Ethan, move!" his teammate called. "Hold on," he replied, already stepping away from the group. The cry came again, higher this time. It wasn't the shout of a soldier. It was the frightened call of a child. Ethan followed it into a narrow side street where rubble covered the ground. Part of a building had collapsed, forming a jagged wall of stone and metal. Smoke rose from somewhere behind it. Through a gap in the debris, he saw her. A tiny alien girl, no more than 7 years old. Her skin was a pale silver blue, and her large, glowing green eyes were filled with fear. She was pinned under a chunk of concrete, her small arms pushing helplessly against it. Her clothes were torn, and there was dust all over her face. When she saw Ethan, her mouth moved, speaking in broken trade language. "Help, please." "Home lights." Ethan didn't know what she meant by home lights, but he didn't have time to ask. He dropped to his knees beside her and started pulling at the rubble. The slab was heavier than he expected, and his gloves scraped against the jagged edges. Over his comms, his squad leader's voice was sharp. "Cross, where are you? We're leaving this sector." "Civilian trapped," Ethan answered. "I can't leave her." "Negative, we don't have time." Ethan cut the comm channel. He wasn't going to listen to orders that told him to abandon a child. Another explosion shook the ground, sending a shower of dust over them. The girl whimpered, covering her face. Ethan kept working, his muscles burning as he shifted the rubble piece by piece. Finally, with a strained push, the slab rolled away, and the girl was free. She didn't move at first, staring up at him as if unsure whether to trust him. Ethan extended his hand. "Come on, we need to go." She hesitated for just a moment, before placing her small hand in his. The second she stood, a loud crack rang out, the distinct sound of a sniper shot hitting the wall behind them. Ethan pulled her down, shielding her with his body. The shot had come from somewhere down the street. Enemy soldiers must have spotted movement. Ethan's heart pounded. They were out in the open. He picked the girl up and began moving quickly, staying low as more shots hit the walls around them. The smell of burning metal filled his nose. The girl clung to him tightly, her arms wrapped around his neck. She spoke again, her voice trembling. "Please, no go. They come." "I know," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'll get you out." The street ahead was blocked by more debris, forcing him to take a longer path. Every corner felt like a trap. He could hear enemy boots on the pavement somewhere close by. He needed to rejoin his squad, but the girl's safety came first. He ducked into a half-destroyed, building to catch his breath and check the girl for injuries. Other than scrapes and bruises, she seemed okay, but her breathing was fast and shallow. He crouched down to meet her eyes. "What's your name?" She looked at him for a moment, then whispered, "Lyra." "All right, Lyra. I'm Ethan. I'm going to keep you safe, okay?" She nodded slowly. Outside, the sounds of the battle grew louder. Distant engines roared, dropships, maybe friend or foe. Time was running out. Ethan adjusted his grip on his rifle and shifted Lyra in his arms. They had to move, no matter the risk. As he stepped back into the street, Ethan knew one thing for certain. His mission had changed. It wasn't just about the evacuation anymore. It was about getting Lyra out of this hell alive, no matter what it cost him. The street ahead was a maze of broken walls, fallen metal beams, and smoke so thick it stung the eyes. Ethan kept Lyra close, holding her against his chest as he moved from shadow to shadow. Every sound, the crack of distant gunfire, the crash of crumbling stone, kept him on edge. His comms crackled again. "Cross, report. Where are you? The last evac transport leaves in 6 minutes. Ethan didn't answer. If he told them where he was, he'd only waste time explaining why he wasn't with them. He needed all his focus on getting Lyra to safety. Another explosion ripped through the district, sending a shockwave down the street. A metal panel fell from above, clanging against the ground just a few feet away. Lyra flinched and buried her face against his armor. He felt her small body shaking. "You're going to be all right," Ethan whispered, moving forward. But things were about to get worse. The sound of boots grew louder behind him. He risked a quick glance over his shoulder and spotted 3 enemy. Soldiers moving down the road, their weapons sweeping the area. They were Varric, tall, broad, and armored in black plating that covered them head to toe. Ethan ducked into an alley, his heart pounding. If they saw Lyra, they wouldn't hesitate. The Miriel species had no part in this war, but that didn't matter to the Varric. They saw civilians as bait or leverage. The alley was narrow, the ground littered with shards of glass. Ethan's boots crunched softly as he moved, trying to keep silent. Lyra's breathing was fast against his neck, her tiny hands gripping his, armor so tightly it almost hurt. He reached the far end of the alley and peered around the corner. The path ahead led to the old tram station. If he could get there, he might find an intact tunnel that would take them closer to the evacuation point. He was about to step out when he heard the Varric again, closer this time. They were coming straight for the alley. "Stay quiet," he whispered to Lyra, setting her down behind a half-collapsed crate. She crouched low, her wide green eyes fixed on him. "Don't move until I come back, no matter what you hear." She nodded slowly, her lips pressed together. Ethan stepped into the open, rifle raised. As the first Varric rounded the corner, Ethan fired. The shot hit the soldier's chest plate, knocking him back. The second Varric took cover, returning. Fire. Bolts of red energy hissed through the air, striking the walls around Ethan. He moved quickly, firing short bursts to keep them pinned down. The third soldier tried to flank him from the side, but Ethan spun and dropped to one knee, firing, until the enemy stumbled and fell. He felt the vibration of another shot hit the wall beside his head. Too close. Ethan ducked back into the alley, his pulse racing. "Lyra, come on!" She scrambled toward him, and he scooped her up, running for the tram station. The sound of enemy shouting followed them. The station was a shell of its former self. Shattered glass, burned seats, and metal supports twisted like wire. The old tram cars lay on their sides, some half buried under rubble. He moved toward a set of stairs leading down into the tunnels, but before they could reach them, a burst of gunfire tore across the station floor. Ethan dropped behind a fallen support beam, keeping Lyra close. Through the dust, he saw more enemy troops entering from the far side. This wasn't just a random patrol. They were searching for something. Or someone. Ethan's gut told him it was Lyra. Maybe they knew who she was. Maybe they just didn't want any survivors. Either way, they weren't stopping. He took a breath and looked at Lyra. She was trembling, her small hands clinging to his armor again. "We're going to get through this," he told her. "I promise." He leaned out and fired toward the advancing troops, forcing them to dive behind cover. Then he sprinted toward the stairwell, weaving between the wreckage. His boots pounded against the cracked tiles, each step echoing in the hollow station. They reached the tunnel entrance, but Ethan knew they couldn't just run blindly into it. If the enemy followed, it would be a trap. He set Lyra down behind, a pile of debris at the base of the stairs. "Stay here and stay down," he told her again. She grabbed his hand before he could move away. "Don't go." Ethan looked at her for a moment, then gently freed his hand. "I have to. I'll be back in a minute." He climbed halfway back up the stairs and crouched low, keeping his rifle ready. The enemy troops moved cautiously through the station, spreading out to search every corner. Ethan picked his target, the one giving hand signals, and fired. The shot dropped the leader, throwing the others into confusion. Ethan used the moment to fire again, hitting another soldier's shoulder and sending him spinning to the ground. The rest began firing wildly, their shots sparking against the walls. Ethan ducked back down into the stairwell. "Lyra, move! Now!" She scrambled to his side, and they plunged into the tunnel's darkness. The air was damp and smelled of dust and rust. Their footsteps echoed faintly as they moved deeper. Ethan kept his rifle ready, checking every shadow. The tunnel curved sharply, and ahead he saw faint daylight, an exit. But when they reached it, Ethan froze. Outside, through the broken doorway, was a wide-open street with no cover, and somewhere beyond it was the evacuation point. He crouched, scanning the rooftops. This was the kind of place snipers loved. The girl's safety depended on crossing fast and unseen, something that was nearly impossible in this open space. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the choice. If he waited too long, the last transport would leave without them. But if they ran now and were spotted— Lyra tugged on his sleeve, her eyes searching his. She didn't understand the danger, but she trusted him completely. Ethan looked at her, then at the street, and made his choice. "Hold on tight," he whispered, lifting her into his arms again, and then, without looking back, he ran. Ethan's boots pounded against the cracked pavement as he ran across the open street, Lyra clinging to his neck. The ruins around them seemed to stretch endlessly, and every step felt too slow. He could hear the hum of enemy gunships in the same distance, their engines like an approaching storm. The street was wide, and there was nowhere to hide. Shattered buildings lined both sides, their upper floors crumbling and dangerous. Ethan's eyes scanned the rooftops for movement, snipers. He could almost feel their scopes searching for targets. Halfway across, a sharp crack rang out, a sniper shot. The bullet smashed into the ground near his feet, sending shards of stone into the air. Ethan didn't stop. He zigzagged as he ran, trying to throw off their aim. Another shot whizzed past his shoulder, so close he could hear it hiss through the air. "Hold on, Lyra!" he shouted over the noise. She pressed her face into his armor, gripping him tighter. Her small body trembled, but she didn't cry. She was stronger than he had expected for someone so young. They reached the far side of the street and ducked into the remains of a shop. Shelves lay broken on the floor, and sunlight streamed through holes in the roof. Ethan crouched low, catching his breath. His heart hammered in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. From the back of the shop, he spotted a narrow hallway that led deeper into the block. He moved toward it, keeping his rifle ready. "Cross to command," a voice came through his. Calm again. "We've got incoming. If you're not at the evac in 3 minutes, you're on your own." Ethan hesitated. 3 minutes wasn't much time. The evac point was still several blocks away, and between him and safety were enemy patrols, snipers, and collapsing buildings. But leaving Lyra behind wasn't an option. He pushed forward into the hallway, stepping carefully over rubble. The far end was a back door that opened into another street. This one was narrower, lined with fallen vehicles and burning debris. The heat hit him like a wall, making the air shimmer. They moved quickly, weaving between wreckage. Every so often, Ethan stopped to listen. The sound of enemy boots grew faint in the distance, but the gunship engines were getting louder. Suddenly, a shadow passed overhead. Ethan looked up to see a Varric gunship circling low, scanning the streets below. Its dark armor gleamed in the sunlight, and its underbelly bristled with weapons. "Down," Ethan whispered, crouching behind an overturned transport. He pulled Lyra close, keeping her hidden under his arm. The gunship's searchlights swept across the street, pausing dangerously close to their position. Ethan held his breath. Lyra didn't move, her wide eyes fixed on the light. After a tense moment, the beam slid away, and the gunship turned toward another part of the district. Ethan exhaled slowly. "All right, let's go." They pressed forward, but soon the street narrowed into a choke point, a section where collapsed. Buildings had left only a thin path. He didn't like it. It was the perfect place for an ambush. He was right. As they stepped into the narrow gap, 3 enemy soldiers emerged from the rubble ahead, weapons raised. Behind him, more footsteps. Approached. They were surrounded. Ethan quickly set Lyra down behind a chunk of wall. "Stay here and don't move," he said firmly. She nodded, though her eyes were wide with fear. Ethan turned and fired at the soldiers ahead, forcing them to scatter into cover. From behind, enemy fire erupted, striking the walls and ground. Near him, he dropped into a crouch, moving from one piece of cover to the next, returning fire in short bursts. The fight was fast and chaotic. Ethan's training took over. Aim, fire, move. One soldier went down, another retreated into the rubble, but the rest kept pressing in. A grenade clinked against the ground near him. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed it and hurled it back toward the attackers. It exploded in a burst of smoke and light, giving him the chance to move forward. He reached the nearest soldier, slamming into him with his shoulder and knocking him down. The soldier's weapon clattered away. Ethan kept moving, knowing he couldn't waste a second. "Lyra! Now!" he called. She scrambled from her hiding spot, and Ethan scooped her up mid-run. They burst through the gap, leaving the soldiers behind. As they fired wildly, energy bolts hissed through the air, but none found their mark. They emerged into a wide courtyard and froze. Ahead, the evac point was visible at last. A large transport ship sat in the center, its engines glowing, ready for takeoff. Dozens of civilians and soldiers were already aboard, and human troops waved for the last stragglers to hurry. But between Ethan and that ship was an open courtyard with no cover, and a Varric heavy gunner setting up his weapon. Ethan's stomach tightened. The gunner's weapon could cut them down before they made it halfway. He looked around desperately. To the left, a row of broken pillars. To the right, a low wall. Neither offered real protection, but they could be enough to make the run less suicidal. "All right," he whispered to Lyra. "This is it. You trust me?" She looked at him and nodded without hesitation. He took a deep breath, then sprinted toward the low wall. The heavy gunner opened fire immediately, the ground erupting with blasts behind them. Pieces of stone and dirt flew into the air, stinging Ethan's arms and face. He vaulted the wall, landing hard but keeping hold of Lyra. Then he kept running, weaving in random patterns to throw off the gunner's aim. They were halfway across when the roar of an engine filled the air. A human dropship swooped in low, its cannons blazing. It tore into the enemy position, forcing the gunner to dive for cover. "Go! Go!" a voice shouted over the comms. Ethan didn't hesitate. With the path clear, he sprinted the last stretch, leaping up the ramp of the transport just as it began to lift off. Inside, soldiers pulled them in and sealed the hatch. Ethan collapsed against the wall, holding Lyra close. She buried her face against him, safe for the first time since he had found her. As the ship rose above the burning city, Ethan allowed himself a single, shaky breath of relief. The fight wasn't over. Not for him, not for humanity, but for now. Lyra was alive. The transport ship shook as it climbed higher into the smoke-filled sky. Ethan leaned back against the cold metal wall, still holding Lyra close. She had stopped trembling, but her small hands were still gripping his armor. Her eyes darted around, taking in the crowded cabin full of tired, frightened faces, humans and aliens alike. Ethan gave her a reassuring nod. "You're safe for now." But deep down, he knew the words were fragile. Safety was never guaranteed in a war zone. Before he could catch his breath, the pilot's voice came over the comm. "We've got enemy gunships incoming. I can't make the jump to high orbit until we shake them." Ethan's head snapped toward the small viewing window. Sure enough, 3 Varric gunships were closing in, their black armor reflecting the flames from below. They were faster and armed with heavier weapons. The pilot made a sharp turn, sending the passengers swaying. "They'll tear us apart before we reach the cruiser unless we take them out," the pilot continued. One of the human soldiers glanced at Ethan. "Turrets jammed. We're down a gunner." Ethan looked at Lyra. She was watching him quietly, her big green eyes showing more trust than fear now. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Stay here. Don't move." She hesitated before nodding. Ethan moved toward the rear hatch where the turret was mounted. The gun housing was half burned from earlier fights, wires exposed. He slid into the seat and powered it up, the screens flickering to life. The gunships wasted no time. The first one fired a barrage, shaking the transport so hard Ethan's teeth rattled. He gritted his jaw, aiming at the nearest target. His first burst of fire streaked through the air, tearing into the gunship's wing. Smoke poured out of it, but it kept coming. The second gunship swung wide, trying to flank. Ethan adjusted quickly, firing a continuous stream until its shields failed. Pieces of armor tore away and it spiraled down into the burning city below. The third came in fast from above, its cannons lighting up. The transport shuddered under the impact. Sparks rained from the ceiling and alarms blared. "Ethan, we can't take another hit like that," the pilot shouted. Ethan locked onto the third gunship, waiting for it to come closer. He fired at the cockpit, and the burst of energy struck true. The gunship exploded in a bright flash, pieces scattering across the clouds. The first, already damaged, tried to break off and escape. Ethan didn't give it the chance. One final shot pierced its core, and it erupted into flames. Cheers broke out in the cabin. The pilot's voice was tight but relieved. "Nice shooting. Setting course for the cruiser." Ethan exhaled slowly, stepping away from the turret. His arms ached, but he pushed the feeling aside. He walked back to Lyra, who looked up at him, with a small smile, the first he'd seen from her. But their relief didn't last. A sudden tremor shook the ship, this one different from weapons fire. The pilot swore under his breath. "Change of plans. Our path's blocked. Enemy forces on the ground just launched a massive anti-air battery. If we don't land now, we're done." The passengers looked at each other in fear. A forced landing in enemy territory was a nightmare. The pilot guided the ship toward a flat stretch of ruined road, touching down hard. The ramp lowered, and the heat from the burning city washed in. "Everyone off!" a soldier shouted. "We hold this position until the backup transport arrives." Ethan grabbed his rifle and motioned for Lyra to stay close. The moment they stepped onto the ground, the sound of distant marching echoed through the smoke. Enemy troops, and more than a few. The soldiers set up defensive positions around the transport, using debris and broken walls as cover. Ethan guided Lyra to a sheltered corner behind the wreck of an old tram car. "Stay here and don't move no matter what," he told her again. She looked up at him. "You come back?" Ethan hesitated just long enough to give her a nod. "Always." He joined the defensive line just as the first wave of Varric soldiers emerged from the smoke. Energy bolts lit up the air, striking walls and sending sparks flying. The ground shook with every impact. Ethan fired, his shots precise. Each time an enemy soldier fell, another took their place. The Varric were relentless. Minutes felt like hours. The defenders were running low on ammunition, their shouts growing more desperate. The air was thick with heat and dust. "Cross!" the squad leader yelled. "We've got a flank on the right! Take it out!" Ethan broke from cover, sprinting across the open street under heavy fire. He slid into position behind a pile of rubble, spotting the Varric unit trying to circle around. He picked them off one by one, forcing the rest to retreat. But his position was now exposed. A Varric heavy trooper leveled a massive cannon at him. Before the trooper could fire, a loud roar filled the sky. Another human dropship, this one heavily armed, breaking through the smoke. Its guns tore into the enemy line, scattering them in all directions. The squad leader's voice came through the comm. "Backup transport is here! Everyone fall back!" Ethan sprinted for the tram wreck where Lyra was hiding. She stood up the moment she saw him, running to meet him. He lifted her into his arms and carried her toward the dropship as human soldiers covered their retreat. Once aboard, the ramp closed and the dropship rose quickly into the sky. Ethan collapsed into a seat, Lyra still holding on to him tightly. This time she didn't speak. She just rested her head against his chest. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the noise fade for a moment. They had survived the impossible stand, but he knew this wasn't the end. The girl was still in danger, and he had no idea how far the enemy would go to get her back. And somehow, he was certain they would try. The dropship cut through the smoky skies, climbing toward orbit. Inside, the air was tense. Soldiers sat in silence, catching their breath after the brutal fight. The engines hummed steadily, but no one relaxed completely. Everyone knew the Varric didn't give up easily. Ethan sat near the rear hatch holding Lyra close. Her head rested against his chest, her eyes half closed but still watchful. She hadn't said much since they escaped the battlefield. Every now and then, she would glance up at him, as if checking to make sure he was still there. The squad leader walked over, crouching beside Ethan. "You know she's not just any kid, right?" he said quietly, nodding toward Lyra. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" The soldier glanced around before speaking again. "I overheard the pilot's transmission. Command confirmed her identity. She's the daughter of a Miriel High Council member. If the Varric had captured her..." He shook his head. It could have sparked something much worse. Ethan looked down at Lyra, who was playing quietly with one of the straps on his armor. "She didn't tell me who she was," he said softly. "She probably didn't want to," the soldier replied. "But now the stakes are bigger. The Miriel have stayed neutral for years. If they see humanity risk everything to save one of their own, it could change the whole war." Before Ethan could answer, the dropship jolted violently. Alarms blared, and the pilot's voice came over the comm. "We've got company. Enemy. Fighters inbound!" The soldiers scrambled to their positions, securing themselves and preparing for possible impact. Ethan pulled Lyra close, shielding her as the dropship swerved hard to the left. Bright flashes lit up the viewing windows, enemy weapons fire cutting through the darkness of space. The gunner returned fire, scoring hits on one of the enemy fighters, but the others kept coming. The dropship's shields flickered under the... "Strain! Hold on!" the pilot shouted. A sudden burst of speed from the engines pushed everyone back in their seats. The dropship dove sharply, skimming the upper atmosphere of Kelros before pulling up again. The maneuver shook off one fighter, but the remaining two stayed on their tail. Ethan scanned the cabin, looking for anything that could help. He spotted the emergency release for the flare pods, countermeasures that could confuse enemy targeting systems. He moved quickly, hitting the controls. The flares streaked out behind them, exploding in bright bursts. One of the enemy fighters veered, off, blinded by the sudden light. The other pressed forward, still locked on. The dropship's gunner fired again, and this time the shot connected, tearing through the fighter's engine. It spun out of control before vanishing in a burst of fire. A cheer went up from the soldiers, but the pilot's voice cut through it. "We're not safe yet. We're going straight to the cruiser. Prepare for docking." The dropship pushed forward, breaking free of Kelros's atmosphere and into the cold, dark safety of space. Ahead, the massive human cruiser waited, a sleek armored vessel surrounded by smaller escort ships. When they docked, medical teams and officers rushed aboard. The soldiers were led away for debriefing, but Ethan stayed with Lyra. A tall woman in formal Navy uniform approached, her expression serious. "You're the one who brought her out?" she asked. Ethan nodded. She looked at Lyra, then back at him. "You may have just saved more than one life. The Miriel High Council has already contacted us. They're sending an envoy to meet her personally. They insisted you be there as well." Ethan blinked. "Me? Why?" "Because," the officer said, "she hasn't let go of you since you got here. And from what I've heard, you're the only one she trusts right now." Ethan glanced down at Lyra. She met his eyes and gave a small, tired smile. Hours later, in one of the cruiser's clean briefing rooms, the doors opened to admit a group of Miriel dignitaries. They were tall, slender beings with the same silver-blue skin as Lyra, dressed in flowing robes that shimmered faintly in the light. The leader, a dignified man with a crest of pale markings along his forehead, stepped forward the moment he saw her. "Lyra," he said softly in the Miriel tongue. She slipped out of Ethan's arms and ran to him. He knelt, embracing her tightly. The other dignitaries watched, some with relief, others with quiet emotion. When the reunion ended, the leader rose and approached Ethan. "You are human," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "I am," Ethan replied. "You risked your life for her." "Yes." The Miriel leader studied him for a long moment. "There are few in this galaxy who would do such a thing for a child not of their own kind. You have my gratitude and my respect." He turned to the human officers in the room. "The Miriel will remember this act. Our people will no longer stand apart from your struggle." Ethan felt the weight of the words. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a turning point in the war. After the meeting, Lyra returned to him, holding a small glowing flower in her hand. She offered it to him with a shy smile. "For you, Protector." Ethan took it carefully. "Thank you." She stood beside him as the Miriel prepared to depart. One of the human officers leaned close and whispered, "You realize you might have just changed the entire course of the war?" Ethan looked at Lyra, then back at the officer. "I wasn't thinking about the war, I just couldn't leave her there." And in that simple truth, he knew exactly why he had done it. Because sometimes, in the middle of a battlefield, the smallest act of humanity could change everything. The human cruiser drifted silently in orbit over Kelros, its massive hull glinting in the light of a distant sun. The war below still burned, but here aboard the ship, a rare calm had settled. Ethan sat in the quiet of the medical bay, the hum of the ship's systems a steady background sound. His armor was gone now, replaced with a simple navy blue medical shirt. His right arm was wrapped in a light brace, and there were small bandages across his cheek from shrapnel cuts. But compared to the battlefield, this was peace. Lyra sat on the edge of his bed, swinging her small legs back and forth. In her lap was a little tray of food, alien fruits and bread, though she was more interested in talking to him than eating. "You not hurt bad?" she asked in halting trade language. Ethan smiled faintly. "Nothing I can't handle." She nodded as if that settled it, then took a tiny bite of fruit. Her silver-blue skin seemed to glow faintly in the bright lights, and her green eyes were clear now. No more fear, only trust. For the past 2 days, she had visited him every morning, bringing something new from somewhere on the ship. Once, it had been a small, glowing flower from the hydroponics bay. Another time, it was a folded paper shape one of the human crew had taught her to make. Each time, she would hand it to him with the same shy smile and call him Protector. Today, she leaned closer. When you come visit? My home? Ethan hesitated. Your home? She nodded eagerly. When safe? You come. My family meet you. He didn't answer right away. He didn't know where the war would take him next. But seeing the hope in her eyes, he found himself saying, If I can, I will. The door opened, and the Miriel leader, her father, stepped inside. His tall figure seemed to fill the room, his expression serious but warm. Lyra ran to him immediately, and he lifted her up effortlessly. She is safe because of you, the leader said to Ethan. I have told the council of your actions. The Miriel will stand beside humanity in the coming days. Our fleets will answer your call. Ethan nodded. I'm glad she's safe. That's all that matters to me. The leader studied him for a moment, then gave a small bow. Perhaps, but you should know this. You have not only saved a life, you have changed the heart of a people. That is a rare thing in war. Lyra tugged at her father's sleeve, whispering something in the Miriel language. The leader smiled faintly, then set her down. She walked back to Ethan and pressed something into his hand. A small silver pendant shaped like a star. My people give to those who save us, she explained. Now you have it, so you, always welcome. Ethan looked at the pendant for a long moment, then closed his fingers around it. Thank you, Lyra. When the Miriel delegation left the cruiser, Lyra insisted on walking out holding Ethan's hand. The crew watched quietly as they moved down the corridor together. Some smiled, others simply nodded, understanding that what had happened on Kelros was something rare in a galaxy full of war, a moment where compassion overcame orders, and humanity showed why they were different. Later, standing at one of the observation windows, Ethan watched the Miriel ship drift away, its silver hull reflecting the stars. He knew he might never see Lyra again, but the bond they had formed would always be there. The squad leader walked up beside him. Command says the Miriel Alliance could turn the tide, all because you didn't follow orders and saved a kid. Ethan kept his eyes on the stars. I didn't think about alliances or politics. I just couldn't walk away. The squad leader gave him a nod of respect. That's what makes you dangerous to the enemy and valuable to us. Ethan didn't answer, but he felt the truth in the words. As the cruiser prepared to move to its next mission, Ethan slipped the silver pendant around his neck, tucking it under his shirt. The weight of it was small, but it carried more meaning than any medal he could receive. Somewhere out there, a little Miriel girl was safe, her family, whole again, and a bridge between two species had been built in the middle of a war, and for Ethan, that was enough.